My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 34 years old, and I arrived 10 minutes early to my parents' 35th wedding anniversary dinner and still walked in after the dessert plates had already been scraped clean. My mother smiled at me across the wreckage of a finished meal and said, "Oh, you're late. Cover the bill, will you?" My sister laughed into her empty champagne glass. Still as clueless as ever. "How could you be late?" The leather folder slid across the white tablecloth toward me. $1,140. Printed near the top in small gray kitchen numbers was the exact minute the first appetizer had gone in. 6:37. I had been invited for 8:15. I had confirmed it twice. So I did something I had never once done in 18 years of quietly picking up this family's checks. I asked for the manager. What happened in the next 10 minutes turned three faces pale. But here's what none of them knew yet. The bill was never the actual trap. And the thing my mother would ask of me 3 weeks later was worse than anything printed on that receipt. To understand any of it, you have to see the ledger underneath. I'm a certified public accountant. I reconcile things for a living, other people's messes, other people's numbers. When a client's books don't balance, I don't get angry at the books. I just keep pulling receipts until the real story underneath finally shows itself. It took me 18 years to run that same audit on my own family. I live in the city with my husband, Daniel, 38, a chef, the kind of man who says almost nothing and means every word of it. Together, we own a small hospitality company. Hold that thought because it matters enormously later. My parents, Walter and Vivian Hartley, live 25 minutes out in Ashworth Hill, in the same brick house on Birchwood Court they've owned for 31 years. My younger sister, Sienna, lives 5 minutes from them with her husband, Preston Cole. That geography matters too, close enough that they orbit my mother daily, far enough that I became the relative you call, not the one you actually know. In our family, everyone had a role assigned so long ago that nobody remembered assigning it. Dad was the steady one. Mom was the gracious one. Sienna was the shining one. And I was the reliable one, which sounds like a compliment until you learn exactly what it costs. Reliable meant I got the calls that started with, "Honey, it's nothing." Reliable meant my card went down first and the subject changed fast. Reliable meant that when something needed to be absorbed quietly, the family already knew precisely which daughter absorbed it. For 18 years, I told myself that was love with a job description. An accountant should have caught it sooner. The books never balanced. I just hadn't pulled the right receipt yet. The role got assigned the year I turned 16. That was the year Hartley Hardware went under. My dad had run that store for 12 years. Paint, nails, spare keys, free advice for anyone who asked. Then the big box store opened out by the highway, and his old customers started waving at him in its parking lot instead. The bank began calling our house at dinner time. My mother would let it ring and smile harder. It was my dad who slid the shoebox of bills across the kitchen table to me one night after Mom went up to bed. "You're good with this stuff," he said. "I can't tell anymore which ones are screaming." So at 16, I sorted them, screaming, whining, waiting. I set up payment plans in a spiral notebook and coached my father on exactly what to say to the bank, like I was the parent sending him off to his first day of school. He lost the store anyway. He took a warehouse job managing inventory for someone else, and he never once complained, and something in his shoulders never quite came back up. But the family had learned a useful fact. Claire handles it. The first time I paid a bill outright, I was $17,200 to the electric company out of my grocery store paychecks because the notice was pink and my mother had a church luncheon to host that weekend. She never mentioned it. Not a thank you, not a single acknowledgement. Mentioning it would have made it real. I told myself I didn't need thanks. I told myself that for 18 years, actually. 18 years later, I was still paying that same electric bill. It just kept changing its name. To survive inside my mother's house, you had to understand that Vivian Hartley lived by one commandment, and it wasn't in any Bible. How it looks. She'd been a dental receptionist for 30 years, front desk, first face, and she ran our family the exact same way. Whatever happened in the back rooms, the waiting area stayed immaculate. Her thank you cards went out within 48 hours, always in navy ink, never black. Her Christmas photo got staged in October. And through every year of the store dying and the warehouse job and the pink notices, my parents kept their membership at the Ashworth Hill Country Club because the Hartleys had always belonged, and belonging was the entire point. I was 19, home from college, when I finally asked the question out loud. Dad had just picked up a Saturday shift. Mom was addressing envelopes for the club's spring gala. I said maybe the club dues could wait a year, that it was okay to just be normal for a while. My mother set down her fork like it was made of glass and looked at me the way you look at a stain. We don't talk about money at this table. That was the whole conversation. Not anger, anger would have acknowledged something. Just the rule, laid down flat, the way you'd close a window. It took me years to understand what that rule was actually for. It sounded like manners. It functioned like a muzzle. Because in a family that never talks about money, nobody ever has to ask who's paying. There was one thing that table never learned. Silence isn't free. Somebody is always paying for it. My sister Sienna, 30 years old, married the picture. Preston Cole worked in finance. That's how he always said it, in finance, the way you'd say in Congress. And from the outside, they were the frame my mother had been waiting her whole life to hang. The leased BMW. The wedding with 200 guests and a champagne wall. Sienna's part-time marketing job that mostly produced photos of Sienna, tan and laughing, captioned with the word blessed. At Sunday dinners, Preston talked about markets the way weathermen talk about fronts moving in. And lately he'd started mentioning a lake house they were eyeing. I want to be fair to my sister, because this story bends around her later. My parents did not love Sienna 1 ounce more than they loved me. I believed that then, and I believe it now. What my mother loved was the version of our family that Sienna photographed well. Sienna wasn't the favorite child. She was the useful evidence. And me, with my sensible car and my quiet marriage and a job that sounded like a nap, I was the family's off-camera expense. Here's the thing they forgot about accountants, though. We notice variances. I'd sit at those dinners doing the math without even asking my brain to. A part-time salary plus whatever in finance actually meant, minus that car, minus that wedding, minus a lake house nobody ever showed the numbers on. The table didn't cover the life on display. In my office, we have a name for that gap and a rule about it. Variance is just a story you haven't been told yet. And variances always surface. Now for the part of the ledger my family never once saw. 11 years ago, when I was 23 and a year into my first accounting job, a diner on 5th Street hired me to do their books. The Sparrow, cracked vinyl booths, a neon bird missing half its glow, and a 27-year-old cook named Daniel Bennett, who'd taken over the place from his retiring boss the year before and was quietly drowning in it. I went in to organize receipts. I stayed because of what I found inside them. The Sparrow wasn't failing. It was bleeding from 3 small cuts nobody had noticed. And the food was worth saving. Daniel worked 17-hour days and fed half the neighborhood what it cost him to make it. My grandmother, Grandma Iris, had died the spring before and left me $10,000 with a note in her wobbly cursive. Use it on something that feeds you. I've never been struck by lightning, but I imagine it feels like the night I did that math. I put in that $10,000 plus $18,000 of my own, every dollar I'd saved since I was 16. $28,000 total for 51% of a diner most people had already written off. The scariest arithmetic of my entire life. Daniel kept 49% in the kitchen. I took the books, the lease, and the debt. We fixed the 3 cuts. The Sparrow lived. Then it worked. Then it quietly thrived. 3 years after that, I married the cook. And on paper, remember that word, paper, the majority owner of everything that came next was me. What came next took 8 more years of flat-top burns and quarterly panic, and its name was Amberlight. Downtown, white tablecloths, low amber light, a wine list Daniel argued about for a full month. We opened it 3 years ago under our company's name, Prairie Root Hospitality, Prairie Root, because it holds the soil no matter what the weather does. Every food writer in town covered that opening. I mailed my family invitations on thick cream cardstock, hand-addressed the way my mother taught me. I called too. My mom said it sounded lovely, but the member guest tournament was that same weekend, and you can't just skip the member guest. Sienna texted that some new spot downtown wasn't really their scene, maybe once it settled. My dad said, "Congratulations, kiddo," in a voice like he was patting a dog that had brought him something strange. Nobody came. Daniel found me that night in the office folding the seating chart into smaller and smaller squares. He took it out of my hands. "You don't owe anyone a second invitation," he said. So I stopped issuing them. Not a grudge, a boundary. And I knew the difference because a grudge would have felt better. I just quietly stopped explaining my life to people who had already shown me the exact size of their interest. As far as Ashworth Hill knew, Daniel had the diner and Claire did his books. and that information had been frozen since I was 23. They skipped the opening everyone in town was talking about. 3 years later, they'd walk back through those same doors as guests of honor, at a party I was invited to only on paper. The invitation came on a Tuesday in October. The family group chat had been circling my parents' 35th for weeks. Mom deserves something special this year, that genre of message. Then separately, a text from Sienna just to me. Dinner for Mom and Dad's 35th, Saturday, Amberlight 8:15, just us 5, dress nice. I sat in my parked car outside a client's office and read it 4 times, Amberlight. Of all the restaurants in this city, my family had picked mine and they had absolutely no idea. I felt 2 things at once and enjoyed neither. The first was a laugh with no sound in it. The second, underneath, was something embarrassingly close to hope. Because here's what I did with that text. I typed back, 8:15, right? And Sienna replied with a thumbs up next to 2 champagne glasses. I confirmed the time twice. Hold on to that. Then I drove home and told Daniel and watched the exact same thought cross his face. Maybe this was the night. 35 years of marriage, the whole family at one table in the warmest room I had ever built. Maybe this was finally the night I told them the truth about my life, not as a confession, not as a correction, but as a gift. I'd give the toast. I'd tell them about Grandma Iris's $10,000 and the sparrow-shaped sign and the prairie grass, and then I'd comp the entire meal. My treat forever. Daniel watched me plan it all with his arms crossed. He only said one thing. Call me when you tell her. I want to hear her face. I laughed. I actually laughed. Wednesday night, 3 days before the dinner, my dad called me. This part matters, so let me tell it slowly. Walter Hartley does not use the telephone. He answers it like it owes him money, then hands it straight to my mother. But that night his name lit up my screen at 9 o'clock, and when I picked up, he was already halfway through a sentence, casual in the specific way of a man who has rehearsed being casual. He wanted to know, hypothetically, how a reverse mortgage worked. Asking for a buddy at the shop, he said, the shop. Though he'd been retired from the warehouse for 2 years, I set down the invoice I'd been reviewing and gave the buddy an honest answer. What it costs, what it risks, who it actually makes sense for, which is almost nobody I'd ever advise. Then I asked, quiet and level, the way I'd ask a client. Dad, is everything okay with the house? A pause with static in it. Then a laugh, half a beat too late. Everything's fine, kiddo. You know your mother. She watches those news segments and gets ideas. And we talked about the weather, because in my family, the weather has always been load-bearing. After he hung up, I sat with my pen not moving. Retired warehouse managers do not ask hypothetical questions about the roof over their own heads. I know exactly what money trouble sounds like when it clears its throat and tries to pass itself off as curiosity. I'd been hearing it since I was 16. So I did what the responsible daughter does. I made a note to sit him down after the anniversary, once the party glow had loosened him up, and I filed it away. I shouldn't have filed it. Thursday, Sienna summoned me to lunch to coordinate the anniversary, which turned out to mean I would sit and listen while she narrated a mood board. 10 minutes on the flowers she'd ordered for the table, white ranunculus, because peonies were over, and the silk scarf she'd found for Mom, and how Preston thought a toast should happen at exactly the right moment. Timing is everything with toasts. Then, somewhere between the entree and the check, she did the thing my family does. She made my role sound like a favor I'd been personally begging to do. You're so good with the boring parts, she said, waving her fork. You'll handle the restaurant bill Saturday, right? We covered the flowers. The flowers. $60 of ranunculus against a banquet dinner at the best restaurant in the city whose private party menu I had personally approved. But sure, we each brought what we could. One of us just didn't know what the other one was actually bringing. Then came the dig, offered sweetly, the way she'd offered it since we were kids. Must be so nice, honestly, your little life. No pressure, nothing to keep up. Our check landed. Sienna did the move I could set a metronome by, the slow reach toward her bag, eyes drifting to the window, 3 unhurried seconds of theater. And I put my card down like I always had. And she let me like she always had. 18 years of choreography in one small gesture. I remember thinking, as I signed, that at least Saturday would be different. Saturday I'd be the one giving. I had no idea yet how right I was about that, or how wrong. Saturday arrived wearing October's best light. My mother texted the group chat at noon. Don't be late tonight, with a little smiling face, and I noticed, without letting it mean anything yet, that no actual time appeared anywhere in that thread. The time lived in exactly one place. Sienna's private text to me. 8:15, confirmed twice, sealed with champagne glasses. I laid my green dress on the bed, the one Daniel calls my closing argument dress. I wrapped the gift I'd been assembling for a month. My parents' wedding photo from 1991, the one that had curled and yellowed in the hallway, restored by a specialist and reframed in walnut. In the photo, my mother is 26 and laughing with her whole face, and my father is 28 with his arm around her like he can't believe his luck, and nothing about how it looks is arranged. I love that photo. I wanted to hand it to the actual people in it. Daniel couldn't come, our third place. The little bistro across the river was down a line cook, and Saturday service waits for no marriage. But he kissed me at the door and said, "Call me when you drop the news. I want to hear her face." I left the house absurdly early for a 10-minute drive, because reliable is a disease, and I let the valet line eat the spare time. At 8:05, 10 minutes early, I pulled up to my own restaurant holding a gift for a party that was already over. The valet knew my face, Ray, on weekdays, but Saturdays it was a kid named Denny, and Denny did something strange when I stepped out of the car. He looked at me, then at the door, then back at me, like a man doing math that refused to resolve. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, and his voice put a question mark where none belonged. I should have stopped and asked. Instead, I was carrying a walnut frame and 2 decades of hope, so I smiled and went in. The host's stand was buried. A 12-top rehearsal dinner had just been seated, servers flowing around each other like water finding drains. And across the room, I saw Marisol. Marisol Vega has run our front of house for 6 years. She started at the Sparrow, managing its breakfast chaos with a pencil behind her ear, and moved up with us when Amber Light opened. She's the calmest person I employ, which is exactly how I knew, the moment her face did what it did, that something was wrong. She saw me, and her professional smile dropped for half a second into something I'd never once seen on her, alarm, and a kind of wince, like watching someone walk straight into a glass door. She started toward me. Weaving between tables, got close enough to say, "Claire, I didn't see your name on the..." And then the kitchen door swung open. A food runner said her name with the urgency that means now. The 12 tops in trays were dying under the heat lamps, and Marisol gave me one helpless look and was gone. I stood there holding my parents' 1991 wedding photo, hearing the last thing she'd said with no idea what it meant. She knew something I didn't. In about 4 minutes, we would trade. I found my family at the big round table in the back corner, the best table in my house, the one we hold for anniversaries. They were finished. Not finishing. Finished. Dessert plates scraped clean. Espresso cups drained. My sister's lipstick print on an empty champagne flute. Sienna's white ranunculus sat in the middle of the wreckage, looking as confused as I felt. 4 chairs showed the comfortable sprawl of people 2 hours into an evening. The 5th chair, mine, stood untouched. And I noticed, the way you notice a missing stair, that there was no place setting in front of it. No napkin, no silverware, no glass. My mother looked up, and her face did something I will spend years trying to forget. It lit with genuine, unhurried pleasure, the hostess spotting her last guest. "Oh, you're late," she said, warm as anything. "Cover the bill, will you?" A ripple of laughter went around the table, the padded kind that furnishes a joke that isn't one. Sienna didn't even look up from her phone. Still as clueless as ever. "How could you be late?" Preston leaned back, 2 buttons open, and slid the leather check folder across the tablecloth toward me with one finger, the way you'd push a plate toward a dog. My dad was the only one who met my eyes, and then the only one who couldn't. I stood there in my closing argument dress, holding their wedding photo in walnut, and looked at that bare stretch of tablecloth in front of my chair. You don't forget to set a place at a family dinner. Someone tells the server not to. There was no place setting at my chair because you don't set a place for someone you've already decided not to feed. I sat down in the chair with nothing in front of it, set the gift beside me, and 18 years of training reached for that leather folder on autopilot. I actually had my thumb on my card. Then I saw the numbers. Whoever printed the check had left the kitchen timestamps on, the way our system does for large parties. First item fired at 6:37. Oysters, 2 orders. Champagne at 6:58, the good bottle. Entrees away at 7:15. Dessert at 7:52. The entire evening, 35 years of marriage, toasted and plated and celebrated, sat printed on one strip of paper, and every single minute of it was over before 8 o'clock. My invitation said 8:15. I had it in writing. I had confirmed it twice and been confirmed twice with a thumbs up and champagne glasses. I did the only thing I know how to do when numbers tell a story people won't. I read it again. 6:37 doesn't happen by accident. A party of 4 doesn't get seated 90 minutes before the 5th guest by a scheduling slip, not when the 5th guest has the time in writing. The reservation had been made for 6:30. Mine was the only 8:15 in the entire building. I looked up from the check and around the table, one face at a time, the way I go down a column. My mother radiant, Sienna bored, Preston watching me with his arms crossed and something patient in his mouth, my father studying his coffee spoon like it had scripture on it, and the understanding arrived whole the way a balance does. They hadn't invited me to dinner. They'd invited me to the check. I want to tell you I stood up right then and delivered the speech 18 years had earned. I didn't. What I did was watch my father reach for his water glass. It's a small thing, a man reaching for water. His shirt cuff pulled back as his arm extended, and I saw his wrist, and the room went a little quiet in my ears. Bare. My father's wrist was bare. You have to understand, Walter Hartley has worn the same watch since before I could read. A steel Hamilton, bought the week he opened Hartley Hardware, back when the future had his name on the sign. When the store went under, he sold the shelving, the register, the sign itself. He kept the watch. He wore it through 16 years of warehouse shifts, wore it fishing, wore it to my wedding. My whole life, that watch was the one thing he owned that the world hadn't repossessed. And tonight, there was only a pale stripe of skin where 30 years of it used to sit, white against his tan, like a scar that hadn't decided what to become yet. He caught me looking. His hand came off the glass and his cuff came down, one smooth, practiced motion, and his eyes went anywhere else. My anger didn't disappear. It just moved over and made room, because a man doesn't take off a watch like that. A man surrenders it. Somewhere between the reverse mortgage question on Wednesday and this table on Saturday sat a story nobody was telling me, and it was wearing my father's tan line. So I made a decision, sitting there in front of no place setting. The old Claire would pay, drive home, and cry in the garage with the engine off. I stayed in the chair. Somebody at this table was drowning quietly, and for once it wasn't me. If you want to see my mother truly come alive, give her an audience. It took her about 90 seconds to find one. 2 tables over, being seated with menus, were the Whitmores, Bill and Sandra, Ashworth Hill Country Club, the couple whose Christmas letter my mother had been quietly competing with for 2 decades. My mother's spine found 2 new inches. Her voice changed registers, from family warm to reception desk bright, projecting just enough to carry. Sandra, look at this, the whole family celebrating us, 35 years. A wave like a parade float. Sandra Whitmore waved back, mouthed congratulations, admired the flowers from a distance, and my mother gestured around the table at the empty plates, the drained flutes, the daughter who just arrived to a finished meal, and presented all of it as bounty. Our girls insisted, she told the room. Nothing's too much for family. I watched her do it, and for the first time in my life I saw the machine instead of the woman. The performance wasn't vanity, it was maintenance. It was a payment on a mortgage I couldn't yet see, made in the only currency she'd ever trusted. I leaned toward my dad while she performed and asked it quietly, under the room noise, one professional to the man who'd once slid me a shoebox. Dad, is everything good with the house? His mouth opened, and my mother, without turning her head an inch, without letting 1 watt drop from the smile she was aiming at Sandra Whitmore, said it through her teeth, in the voice reserved for the back rooms. We don't talk about money at this table. Funny thing about that rule. I'd heard it my whole life, and it had only ever silenced exactly one person. The one paying. The server came to clear the last dessert plate, and Preston decided the moment had ripened. He tapped the leather folder twice, a little drum roll, and smiled at me with all the warmth of a term sheet. $1,140 all in. You got this, right? We covered Mom's flowers. Sienna lifted her empty flute for a toast that had already happened, to Mom and Dad, 35 years, and the table laughed and echoed it, glasses of nothing raised all around, and the laughter slid over me the way it does over staff. I have watched guests laugh exactly like that past a busser holding a tub of their dirty dishes. That's what I was at this table, staff in a good dress. I looked down at the check one more time, not because the number scared me, $1,140 is a Tuesday at Amberlight, but because I wanted to memorize the shape of the evening printed there. Oysters at 6:37. The good champagne at 6:58. Entrees away at 7:15. Dessert at 7:52. And a daughter due at 8, 15, arriving early with a gift in walnut to find the party eaten and the folder waiting. Every family has a language. This receipt was mine, translated into ours. I closed the folder, set it flat on the tablecloth, and kept my hand on it. My voice came out level, in a way that had nothing to do with calm and everything to do with a decision cooling into place. "Is Marisol on tonight?" My sister rolled her eyes so hard I heard it. "You need a manager to pay a bill." She was right, actually. She just had the sentence pointed the wrong way. I wasn't there to pay it. Marisol crossed my dining room the way she does everything, like the floor owes her rent, and then she saw the seating arrangement. Me at the finished table behind the leather folder. I watched 6 years of history assemble the whole picture in her face before she even reached us. She could have made it awkward. She's too good for that. She stopped at my shoulder, folded her hands, and addressed me in the voice she uses for critics and health inspectors, warm and bulletproof. "Mrs. Bennett, I am so sorry. The reservation came in under Cole, party of 4. I had no idea this was your family's table. Had I known, we would have taken care of everything from the start." The room kept its noise, but our table lost all of it. I felt the silence land differently on each chair. And I said the sentence I had never once in 18 years allowed myself to say quietly, because loud would have been for them and quiet was for me. "It's all right, Marisol. Put it on the house account, the owner's table." What happened to their faces happened in 3 different languages. Preston's phone, which had been lying face up beside his espresso cup all night, turned over with a small clack, and his tan went with it. Sienna's empty flute stopped halfway to a toast that no longer existed, her mouth still holding the shape of a joke. And my mother's smile stayed exactly where Sandra Whitmore could see it, while everything behind it left the building. 3 pale faces, 1 preserved smile. But it was my father I couldn't stop watching. Walter Hartley didn't go pale. He closed his eyes slowly, like a man in a waiting room finally hearing his name called, relief and dread arriving on the same breath. He wasn't surprised the floor had moved. He'd been standing on the crack the whole time. Sienna recovered first, the way she always did by refusing the evidence. "You're a bookkeeper," she said. "You do Daniel's books at that diner." So I gave them the truth the way I give an audit finding, flat, sequenced, no adjectives. 11 years ago, I bought 51% of the Sparrow with everything I'd saved, plus what Grandma Iris left me. $28,000. It grew into Prairie Root Hospitality. Prairie Root opened Amberlight 3 years ago and the bistro across the river last year. The invitations to Amberlight's opening night sat on the kitchen counters of every adult at this table. "You RSVP'd no." That was all. No numbers to brag with, no tour of my life. 5 plain sentences and the quiet. Preston had his phone back out under the tablecloth, thumbs going, and I watched him find the Prairie Root page, watched his jaw do the arithmetic of exactly how large a mistake he had just catered. Sienna kept looking from me to the room, the tablecloths, the amber light, the wine wall, like furniture might contradict me. And then my mother finished recalibrating, and I got my first ever look at how Vivian Hartley processes checkmate. Her chin came up, her eyes went wet and bright and aimed, and in a voice pitched perfectly to sound brave, the voice of a woman rising above an injury, she said, "So you sat there and let us celebrate, and then you—" A beat, and the sentence found its true shape. "Why would you humiliate your family like this, Claire?" And there it was. In my mother's ledger, the crime was never the trap they'd set for me. The crime was that it had been witnessed. Nobody lingers over a comped meal they meant to stick you with. Within 10 minutes, my family was performing its goodbyes. My mother kissed the air beside my cheek for the benefit of the room, told the Whitmores the girls had spoiled them rotten, and steered for the door with her chin at gala height. It was my dad who slowed in the parking lot under the valet lights. He caught my elbow, and up close he looked like a building with the load-bearing wall gone. "The 8:15 thing," he said, barely moving air. "That wasn't your mother, honey." Preston said the time said it'd be smoother. Smoother. I stood there holding the word. Smoother meant present for the bill and absent for the evening. Smoother meant my chair with no place setting, my name attached to the check and nothing else. And under the word, something colder was moving, because you don't need smoother unless the check itself was the problem, unless nobody else at that table could actually catch it. My dad's mouth was still working. "Claire, honey, listen." "There's something." And from the dark, my mother's voice arrived like a hand on a shoulder, sweetness stretched over steel. "Walter, it's cold." He straightened. Whatever had been climbing out of him turned around and went back down. He gave my elbow one squeeze, the same squeeze from the shoebox nights. I'd have known it blind and walked to the car. I watched my father cross that parking lot with his shoulders set like a man carrying a suitcase no one else could see. I stood next to the gift I'd never given, in front of the restaurant I owned, and understood I'd gotten every answer that night except the one that actually mattered. Smoother, for whom? It took my mother less than 48 hours to get her version into circulation, and her version was a masterpiece. By Monday, my phone was ringing with ants. The story going around the family did not contain a 6:30 reservation, or a fifth chair with no place setting, or a leather folder traveling across a tablecloth. In my mother's cut, Claire had money all along and hid it from her own family. Can you imagine, all those years, letting your parents worry? And then she chose their anniversary, in front of the Whitmores of all people, to spring it. Aunt Denise got me at my office line, her voice soft with borrowed grief. Your poor mother cried all night, sweetheart. Was the little show necessary? The little show. I sat with the phone against my ear, looking at a client's clean, honest, reconciled ledger, and I felt the old reflex wake up and stretch. I knew exactly how to fix this feeling. I'd been fixing it since I was 17. You buy the piece, you write the check or the apology that works like a check, and the temperature drops, and everyone gets to keep their version, and the cost quietly posts to your account. I actually drafted the text. Mom, I'm sorry the night went the way it did. I never meant. My thumb hovered. Daniel set a cup of tea at my elbow and said nothing, which is his loudest setting. And I looked at that apology the way I'd look at a suspicious invoice, and I asked it my professional question. What exactly are we paying for here? I deleted the draft. I had bought that particular piece for 18 years. It never once stayed bought. Tuesday afternoon, my sister walked into my accounting office without an appointment, and I almost didn't recognize her. Sienna curates herself the way museums curate wings, and the woman in my doorway had mascara shadows and a coat buttoned wrong. She sat down across my desk in the client chair, and I understood this was the first time in our entire adult lives she had ever come to me. Then the picture cracked all the way through. Preston lost his job 4 months ago, she said. Not restructured, not consulting, walked out with a box, from a brokerage that did not send references. The BMW was 2 payments behind on a lease they should never have signed. The cards, she looked at the ceiling, set it to the light fixture, 61,000. And the number had been growing in the dark like a mushroom, because Preston kept saying one good quarter would fix it, and there was always a reason this quarter wasn't the one. The lake house talk had been for our parents' benefit. The dinner had been Preston's design. Amber light or nothing, he'd said, because the Whitmore's daughter had posted from Amber light, and if they were going to be seen celebrating, it had to be there. And they could not pay for it. Claire, we could not pay for dinner, so he set your arrival for the ending. Present for the bill, absent for the evening. Smoother. She asked for the thing I already knew she'd come to ask. Just float us 1 month, quietly, don't tell Mom. And I heard it, the family motto, wearing my sister's shaking voice. I didn't write the check. I slid a card across the desk instead, a nonprofit credit counselor, a woman I trust, no charge, and said, bring Preston, bring the real numbers, then we talk. Sienna stared at that card like it had slapped her and left without it. Thursday morning, my father came to the Sparrow alone. I was in the back office when Marisol texted me, your dad's at the counter. When I came out, he was on seat 4, the cracked one he didn't know I'd never fixed out of superstition, drinking black coffee like the last 30 years hadn't happened. He didn't do small talk. He unfolded a paper from his jacket, smoothed it flat on the counter, and turned it so it faced me. My chest did something I'm still not entirely sure I've undone. Bank letterhead, notice of default, a second mortgage on the house on Birchwood Court. $86,000 taken 6 years ago. A signature I recognized and one I barely did. Behind on payments. $9,200 past due. 30 days to bring it current, or the process everyone knows the name of begins. I asked the question in order, like an intake form, because order was all I had. Where did it go, Dad? He counted it off on his fingers, quiet, like a man confessing to weather. The club, every year they couldn't afford it because your mother, and he stopped and restarted. Sienna's wedding, the part that made it look the way it looked. 25,000 into Preston's sure thing 2 years ago, gone where sure things go. The roof, the only honest item on the whole list. And the watch. He said it before I could even ask, staring into his coffee. Pawn shop out on Route 9. $900. It covered a piece of last month's payment. "Your mother doesn't know the letter came," he said. "Claire, don't tell her I told you." And there it was again. The only thing this family had ever really asked of me, my money and my silence. That night I put every number on my own kitchen table and made them all sit in the light at once. $9,200 past due, $86,000 behind it, $61,000 on the coal cards, $1,140 of anniversary dinner. And down in the corner of the page, because accountants are honest, even when it's ugly, my own column, 18 years of quiet transfers, the electric bill, the club dues I'd covered twice in my 20s without ever once being asked out loud, the lunches, the check after check after check, a lifetime line item I had never once totaled, because totaling it would have made it real. Daniel read the page over my shoulder, and being Daniel, he found the simplest true sentence in the room. Prairie Root could wire the 92 tomorrow. Nobody would feel it. He was right. That's what stopped me cold. Nobody would feel it. The letter would vanish. My mother would never know. My father's shoulders would come up an inch. Christmas would arrive on schedule with navy ink thank you cards, and the machine would simply keep running, because the machine had never once in 30 years been asked to feel anything. It ran on exactly this kind of quiet money. I stood at my own kitchen window and finally read my own file. Every silent check I had ever written wasn't kindness. It was fuel. Every time I absorbed a cost in the dark, the picture survived another season, and the people inside it got to keep not knowing, and the daughter outside it got to keep being invisible, which I saw, with the clarity you only get once or twice in a life, was the deal I had been silently accepting all along. Invisible is safe. Nobody audits the ATM. I had been the second mortgage of this family since I was 16 years old, and both of us were now past due, so I didn't wire anything. I picked up my phone and called my mother, and when she answered in her reception desk voice, I said it without a hello level, the way you read a verdict. "Sunday, your kitchen. We're going to talk about money at the table." A silence so long I could hear her smile ending. Then the click. I set the phone down, and Daniel looked at me across all those numbers, and neither of us said anything because there was nothing left to reconcile. Sunday, then. Sunday afternoon, I drove the 25 minutes to Ashworth Hill with a folder on the passenger seat and walked into a kitchen staged like a diplomatic summit. Ironed tablecloth. The silver coffee service that only ever leaves the cabinet for funerals and bishops. My mother had dressed for it, pearl earrings, and had arranged my father at the table like a prop, and Sienna was perched on a stool by the counter with the stillness of a girl who's been told to be scenery. I sat down and reached for my folder. My mother reached for her coffee pot first, and before I got a word out, she made her opening offer, with the serenity of a woman who'd spent 3 days building it. She'd decided, she said, pouring, to forgive the scene at the restaurant. Families weather these things. What mattered now was moving forward, and moving forward looked like 3 small items. She would take care of your father's little arrears. She said it exactly like that, the little arrears, as if it were a stain on a jacket. Quietly, of course, this week before the 30 days ran out. She knew about the letter. She'd known the whole time. Item 2, a note to the Whitmores, something gracious, smoothing over that unfortunate evening. Item 3, she set down the pot and smiled at me with what I genuinely believe she felt, in her own way, as love. We never speak of any of this again, any of it. The mortgage, the dinner, the restaurant, the whole unpleasant chapter. And then, Christmas like always, family like always. There it was, the whole shining package, everything I'd wanted since I was 16, wrapped and priced. All I had to do to buy it was disappear again. I didn't open the folder. Instead, I asked the question I had never once thought to ask in 34 years, and I asked it gently because I actually wanted the answer. "Mom, who taught you the rule?" She blinked. "What rule?" "No money talk at the table. The picture first. Who taught you?" And something happened in my mother's kitchen that I had never once seen. The hostess flickered just for a second. Nobody was performing. She looked at the iron tablecloth, and when she spoke, her voice had a 19-year-old inside it. She'd saved 3 months of her receptionist pay once, she said. Bought her own mother a good wool coat, camel, from the good department store downtown, the kind the doctors' wives wore. Her mother drove it back to the store the very next morning and returned it for cash. Told the sales girl her daughter had gotten above herself. Told Vivian, in the car, that a coat like that on their street would make people think they were struggling and showing off about it at the same time. And the one unforgivable thing a family could ever do was let people see it sweat. "In my family," my mother said, folding her hands. You learned that they keep you when the picture is pretty. So I kept this family's picture pretty for 35 years, Claire. Whatever it cost, that was my job. Her hands lay flat on the tablecloth, and I noticed, for the first time I could remember, a small chip in her nail polish at her own stage table, next to the silver coffee service. For 1 second, I saw the 19-year-old holding the returned coat, and I understood my opponent completely, and it didn't change one single thing I'd come to do. Then the second passed, and my mother straightened. So the card for the Whitmores, Monday. I opened the folder and laid one handwritten page flat on her iron tablecloth, turned so everyone could read it, and I went down it out loud, slow, the way you read names at a memorial. $9,200. The past due, $86,000. The second mortgage nobody voted on, $61,000. My eyes flicked up, and my sister went white on her stool, the cards. $1,140. Dinner. My mother's hand moved toward the page like she could tidy it away, and I put my finger on it and held it flat. This family is not broke, Mom. This family is expensive. There's a difference, and I'm done funding it in the dark. Then I made my offer, looking straight at her, because she deserved to hear terms the way she'd always given them, calmly, at a table over coffee. 1. Prairie Root pays the bank $9,200 this week directly on the record, with my name on the wire where anyone can read it. Not a secret. Never again a secret. 2. A credit counselor. Independent, no charge, already vetted. She sits down with you and Dad, and with Sienna and Preston, and every card, every balance goes on her desk. That part is not negotiable. It rides with the money. 3. And my father lifted his head. The Sparrow needs a morning host, Tuesdays through Thursdays. Real shifts, real wages, your name on a schedule. And the first paycheck is yours to spend how you want. I'd start with Route 9 because the Hamiltons' redemption window is 90 days, and we're inside it. 4. First Sunday of every month, dinner at the diner, all of us. And no bill will ever touch that table. I looked at the whole architecture of her offer and gave her my answer to the last item on it. And the note to the Whitmores, no, I won't apologize for being seen. My mother rose from her chair the way a flag goes up a pole. If you do this, she said, and her voice had lost its reception desk finish, had gravel in it now, if you turn this family into your charity case, then don't come at Christmas. The refrigerator hummed. Sienna didn't breathe. My father's thumb moved once across his bare wrist, an old habit checking the time on skin. And I heard myself answer quietly, and I heard exactly what it cost as it left me, the whole 18-year-old dream of her arms, paid out in one sentence. Then I'll miss you at Christmas, Mom. The diner does a real nice roast on Sundays. You spend your whole life buying a seat at a table. Nobody ever tells you that you can build one instead. My mother left her own kitchen. She walked down the hall with her spine at gala height, and her bedroom door didn't slam. It clicked softly, which somehow was worse. A slam is a sentence. A click is a verdict. The three of us sat in the wake of it, in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and starch, and for a long moment the only sound was the refrigerator and the little clock over the stove that has run 4 minutes fast since the 90s. Then my father cleared his throat, and Walter Hartley, 63 years old, asked me the first question of his new life. This morning shift, he said. Tuesdays. Do I get one of those aprons with the sparrow on it? I said yes, and my voice only broke a little on it. He nodded like a man accepting terms he'd read carefully, and both his hands stayed wrapped around his cold cup, and his shoulders, I watched it happen, came up half an inch. From the stool, so quietly I almost missed it, my sister spoke to the countertop. That counselor, does she do evenings? Preston gets proud before 5. I told her evenings could be arranged. I gathered my page of numbers and left the counselor's card on the iron tablecloth, square in the middle where the coffee service had been. On my way down the hall, I stopped at the bedroom door. 1 second. My hand came up and I watched it hover there. 17 years old again, holding a pink notice, ready to knock and make it all quiet again. I put my hand back in my pocket and walked to the car. Some doors you leave shut. You just make sure yours stays open. 6 weeks. The wire went out Monday morning. $9,200, my name printed plainly in the memo line, and the bank confirmed the account current by Thursday. On the record, in the light, boring as a receipt, which was the entire point. The counselor got the Hartley file, and then, 2 weeks later, the Cole file. Her first appointment with my sister, Preston sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes before he came in. Sienna told me this herself, over the first honest coffee we've had since childhood. But he came in. The BMW went back. They're a one-car family now in a smaller apartment with a $61,000 plan taped inside a kitchen cabinet, 4 years long. And my sister, who once narrated mood boards at me, stirred her coffee and said, "Turns out I was the clueless one." She said it dry. We both let it sit. My father worked his first Tuesday in a Sparrow apron and found out the regulars remembered Hartley Hardware. One of them still had a key he'd cut back in 1998. Marisol says he tells terrible jokes and refills coffee like it's a sacrament, and that he hasn't stood that straight in years. His third paycheck, he drove out Route 9 alone. He came back with the Hamilton on his wrist, where the pale stripe used to be, and he never said a word about it, and neither did I some accounts you let a man settle himself. And my mother sent a Thanksgiving card. Navy ink, perfect slant, no apology anywhere on it because the woman is exactly who she is. It said the weather had turned and the club was doing a smaller gala this year. And in the last line, the only sentence that actually mattered: "Your father seems well." Aunt Denise reports that at the club, the story now features my daughter, the restaurant tour. The picture survives. It just doesn't bill me anymore. The third first Sunday of the month, the long table by the Sparrow's front window was set for 6. It always is now. That's the rule I never say out loud. On the wall by the register, in its walnut frame, hangs the 1991 wedding photo I never got to give them at Amberlight. My mother laughing with her whole face, the gift that finally found its table. My dad worked the room in his apron even though it was his night off. Sienna came early, carrying a salad she'd made herself, and Daniel put it on the table between his roast and the good bread like it belonged there, because it did. Preston came too, quieter these days, learning the difference between small talk and small print. At 7 minutes past 6, the bell over the door rang. My mother stood in the doorway of a diner she had never once entered in 11 years in her good coat, chin exactly where it always is. Nobody made it a moment, which is the kindest thing a family can decline to do. She sat down at the empty place, set like always, napkin and silverware and glass, because at my table every chair gets a setting, whether or not you believe the person is actually coming. She ordered the meatloaf. She ate all of it. And somewhere between refills, she looked at my father laughing behind the counter, still catching the light on his wrist, and said the only sentence she was ever going to say, which in my mother's currency is a full confession. "Your father's watch looks nice." Toward the end, one of the regulars called over, joking, asking who's picking up the tab for the big table tonight. I looked around at all of it and answered him. "It's on the house. It always was." Here is what 18 years of paying quietly finally taught me. Love that has to be purchased isn't love. It's rent. And the only table worth sitting at is the one where nobody ever slides you the bill for belonging. That's my story. One dinner time to the minute, one bare wrist, and a kitchen table where I finally said the quiet numbers out loud. If you're the one who always covers the bill, take this as your sign. Help in the open or not at all.